Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome everybody, and I would like to welcome everybody for this panel about the geopolitical competition of in Africa between different actors. I would like to introduce our distinguished speakers today. Abshir Aden Ferro, the president of the Alliance for the Future, Somalia, a presidential candidate for the next election in Somalia. Hopefully next year, or we'll see how it's 2 years then, we'll see, okay, how it happens, yeah. Tamás Baranyi, the research director of the Institute of Hungarian Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade. Welcome, Tamás, here. And Abdallah Marwan, the head of the Foreign Office of the Lebanese Kataeb Party. Welcome in Tusványos. And myself, my name is Viktor Marsai. I'm the executive director of the Budapest-based Migration Research Institute and an associate professor of the University of Public Service, an Africanist. This is why I was invited by the organizer to chair this panel today. At first sight, it seems that Africa is very far from both Transylvania and Hungary, but if we are following the news and the geopolitical competition in this new Cold War era, it's revealed that Africa is very close to us. Just consider about the potential Hungarian military deployment in Chad or different EU-NATO operation in the region. So it's very important to see what's going on and to understand what's going on. And I think we can welcome here very distinguished and well-established researchers to tell us today what's going on. First, I would like to invite Mr. Ferro to tell some words about Somalia and this very specific country in the Horn of Africa, a place of a very deep geopolitical competition with a very deep historical and other traditions. So, President, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Victor. First of all, I would like to say thank you to the IDC and who invite me here, and very honorable, Victor, yourself, that you have done your research in against Al-Shabaab, which is the extremist, and also so it is an amazing. And I'd like to say the team of IDC, which I become a member of that one, and then Zoltz, who invite me all the way here, and with my beautiful wife, So just asking the audience quickly, is there anybody who knows where Somalia is? And what do you know about Somalia? The British man is already lifting his hand, So at least we've got somebody. So, 2, 3, amazing, quite a lot. Just going a little bit backward. I'm born in Somalia, and the land of Somalia. But Somalia was also a British and Italian colony. Most of the time, the people I say that when I born in Somalia myself, I born in the land of Somalia, and my birth certificate was in Italian. So I'm the only first black guy who's going to become Italian with paper. So migration, I think we've got a problem there. The second things now that we looked at it, and then I become French because my parents, my father's side, they're French Somalian. My mother, their side, they're British Somalian, ex-military of the French army for 10 years, and in the special branch, looked after our interest, and served the very difficult countries in Middle East and Africa. I get involved myself with the political of Somalia and Horn of Africa when I realized that how wealthy that country is. Do you know that the Somali language that I speak, only 15 million on the population of the planet, is 6 to 10,000 before BC, Jesus. Can you imagine that history? I think the American did not exist when we were speaking basically our own cultural language. In the region, the second motorway, economically maritime on the planet. The second livestock after Australia on the planet. Geopolitically, very sensitive regional because of the Middle East. Ethiopia, we all know the Ethiopian, having all the culture, tradition, religions from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So we always lived it together in a very sensible manner. and shared it before the history of Europe. The party that I created was 2019, when I've seen that we were going very, very challengeable in the region in terms of security, in terms of economically, and in terms of also human race. So there was not also what we call indirect vote. The way the system worked there, before I created my political party, which I have a member of 1.5 million Somalian diaspora following me now, a member of it. The way the election was happening before there was completely failure. It was more supporting the extremists instead of supporting the better life of the Somalians. The political party that I have created now, and we are most strongest right now, 2026, on the ground. So we will have a chance to win the next election, if everything goes well. Economically, very rich country. I'm sure that if you look by the World Bank, and you know that yourself, Somalia diaspora contribute from North America and Europe, and they send money back to Somalia, $1.6 billion per year. $1.6 billion. Those children who left there after the Civil War, they are all today doctors, lawyers, bus driver, Uber driver. They have created themselves positively. Now, the biggest problem we're facing also is the geopolitical between China, Europe, Middle East, Russia. We are the center of all the bigger game is exactly what's happening to your country here. Ethiopia, we're facing a similar problem. Somalia, we're facing a similar problem. Yemen, we're facing a similar problem. But those of us who are stakeholders as a Western, like you guys, it is my job to make sure that we're looking after our interests in a partnership in the Horn of Africa. I think I'll leave it to you back.
Thank you, President, and thank you that you're keeping your time framework. Now I turn to Tamás Baranyi, because we are missing one of our speakers today, who was proposed to come, but he couldn't. So if somebody followed the Hungarian news, there is a plan that the Hungarian defense forces will be deployed to Chad, and I experienced that a lot of Hungarian raised the question, where is Chad, first of all, and why Hungary would like to go to the Sahel region. So I would like to invite you to tell some words about these plans and, in general, the geopolitical importance of the Sahel region.
Thank you very much, Eduard, for giving me the word about this. And it's such a pity that László Eduárd Máthé finally couldn't make it here because he would have been in the position to speak about this project. But I'm also, to a certain extent, in the position to give an overall. I decided not to be bothered, but thank you very much. So I think I also have some outlook on what is happening with Africa. But once we are speaking here, I think a map should have been very useful for here. But again, Chad is pretty big, so I think our audience would be very readily able to place it on the map. Africa has been called for centuries in European parlance as the dark continent, and it wasn't because the population of Africa was mostly black people. It didn't have anything to do with that. It was because it was terra incognita. No one in Europe really knew what's happening inside, and that is why they left it dark on the maps. So it's cartographical expression, but I think it's a very strong metaphor about how we Europeans are still, let's be honest, pretty much ignorant of what's happening inside Africa. But in the early 2000s, 2010s, I think it really became apparent that what's happening inside Africa is by no means ignorable for Europe, because the security, economic, political, societal processes of Europe and Africa are, though not immediately, but tied together. So if there is state instability in Africa, there will be security threats in Europe. There will be, you know, an uptick in migration instantly. So I think in the past 20, 30 years, it really became apparent that the well-being of our extended neighborhood in Africa and also in the Middle East is of very direct consequences for European security and European well-being. And even though it sounds logical, right? But also if you really want to do something about it, it costs money, it costs energy, it costs dedication. And all those things were basically missing in an age when Europe was very safe, there were no very much apparent problems, and everyone was concentrating on, you know, the European integration itself. Those days are over. And I think this recognition led the Hungarian government to try to pick up a more active role actually in the Middle East just as well, but also in Africa. First, for instance, with the Hungary Helps program, which is like a small but very dedicated and I think very professional task force, which at certain small points try to make changes, try to make developments that will enhance societal development. So the point here is not to, I don't know, send out food or water, really, but to build a school. And building schools and building churches are, I think, the best investments in the future. And I think even though it is small in scale, it's really worked. And I think that taking it to the next level was the Hungarian government's decision to send a mission to Chad. Because Chad is a country of high potential, but also of high tensions. It wasn't really involved in the wave of coup d'etat of recent months, recent years. But there is always a low-intensity civil war in this country. You can name it also rebellion. So it's just a question of words, but it's a low-intensity civil war. You have jihadism there. You have like more traditional conflict between pastoralists and agricultural communities. So it's very typical in this sense, I would say. What is non-typical is that Chad remained to be pretty stable on a state level, and their army is like pretty committed. And in terms of the Sahel region, it has firepower, not like the one in Niger, for instance. So there is a chance that with benevolent foreign involvement, Chad's stability could actually be preserved and enhanced. And if it does, I think it can serve as a model for further countries to take action in different African countries to help them. It's not that, you know, the Africans cannot solve their problems. It's not that without assistance they wouldn't be able to do that. It's because we Europeans have had some role in the instability of Africa. Let's be honest. And I think it's just a reprimation of all this if we give this assistance. And because it is already in the making, we are not ready to make a balance of how useful it was, because again, it's still in the making. But I think past experiences show that it really can work, and it's really hopeful that it will work. And again, if a country like Chad can be stabilized along these lines, Europe will be better off. Migration will be like more downsized. Security threats will decrease. So it's again it's very important for our well-being just as well. And I stress this because there are some people in this country and also in Europe who question this whole thing. Why anyone goes to Africa? It's like everything just goes worse, and who cares really? And I think this is a very self-defeating outlook, and this is why I try to, with those words, I try to give an outlook of what led the Hungarian government to make this decision. Sorry if I was wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tamás. Mr. Marwan, when we are speaking about this geopolitical competition struggle in Africa, regularly we are highlighting and speaking about United States, EU countries, China perhaps, but we tend to forget the role of different Arab and Middle East nations, not to mention the connection between the two, let's say, region, continent, which goes back for not just centuries, but thousands of years. How do you see this phenomenon?
Thank you, Victor, for the question. Thank you for having me. I want also to thank Mr. Nemezsolt for inviting me here, and the CDI and Sofia also for bringing the international guests to give an international perspective to our Hungarian and friends. First of all, if I may just give a little background and perspective and then go to answer your question. We all tend to think about, not we all, like in Europe, they tend to think about Africa as this very distant neighbor. And to be honest, I think maybe those who are of an elder age would tell us that a few years back or many decades back, Africa wasn't a hot topic for Europe. I don't know if I'm mistaken. And at the same time, it wasn't a hot topic for the Middle East as well, because of all the types of disconnection that we had. Today, these are changing, and I would like to mention some of the pros and the cons of the relation with the African continent. When we say security, and this was mentioned by the previous speakers, but let's divide security. Let's go deeper into the term security. What is security threat or security challenges coming from Africa? We can put three main titles for this. The first one are the terrorist groups that are coming from Africa. We hear a lot about ISIS, about Al-Qaeda, but you have also Al-Shabaab, we have also terrorist groups in Nigeria. And maybe you hear about them when you see a massacre in a certain church in Nigeria, or the kidnapping of the young girls in a certain school. This is where you hear, but this is a very important factor to be taken into consideration, because these groups do not stop at the African borders. They tend to go further and to have a global mission. Like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, they might have a global mission in Europe as well and the West. So this is first challenge or first threat. The second one are the coup d'etat. I think one of the most famous things about African nations and African regimes is the constant changes that don't usually happen in a democratic way, but they usually happen in coup d'etat. And the recent ones that happened in in many countries in Africa, when the French, we heard a lot about the French withdrawal and then more Russian impact. Many coup d'etats happened, and the regime changes in these countries change the whole relation of these countries with Europe and with the Western world. So it can change. We can sleep today knowing that maybe Hungary has 5 partners in Africa. Tomorrow you'll wake up and see only 2 are left because the others had coup d'etat. So this is how fast the dynamic is changing in terms of partnership and being able to have a working relationship with these countries. The third one, and this is something that is recently very much seen here in Europe, is the illegal immigration. Illegal immigration coming through the Mediterranean, coming through all the countries on the southern Mediterranean coast, is also threatening the security in Europe, maybe more in a social way. Many incidents are happening in many European countries, and this is something that is becoming now more and more, countries are becoming more and more alert about this. And even on the social level, on the individual level, there's more alert about what is the security threat that can come from this part. So just to explain the different levels of security. The second one is resources. When we talk about resources, generally it's oil and minerals, but also today water and renewable energy resources are also important fact in Africa. I don't know if you know, but there's a the biggest desert on earth is the Sahara, the Grand Sahara. This is in Africa. And if you want, we don't have a map, as you mentioned, but if you put a mental map in your head, you have the North African countries that are the Arab countries, and then underneath you have a big desert. no man's land. And then underneath, you have all the rest of the sub-Saharan African nations where you have most of the troubles happening. So this is also a very important notion for Europe and for the future of energy in the world. Also food. Food is very important. Africa is a very rich continent, and unfortunately resources are not well managed there. So food security and the food basket of the world should have Africa as a main pillar of any future plan. And I think Somalia can also play a role. Maybe you tell a little bit later about this. And the last one, and this is more on the private sector, is the economic opportunities. I think many Hungarian companies are interested in to go to Africa and to invest in Africa and have business in Africa. But then comes all the questions that we raised before about how sustainable this model is. And talking about schools, building schools and churches, this is important. But what if you build a school and then there's no one to manage it, or the regime changes and the system changes, then it will not give its purpose. And this is going from this background that I just gave to answering the question about the Middle East involvement. I think here the Arab nations, especially the wealthy Arab nations, understood more of the relation between political and economic opportunities in Africa. Because of the fast changing dynamic of regimes in Africa and the African nations, the wealth of the Gulf countries, and here let's put the name on the word Arab countries. We'll put three main countries here in question. The first one is Saudi Arabia, the wealthiest Arab nation with the biggest geopolitical interest in Africa. The second one is the UAE, and the third one is Qatar. Because these countries are not so big, but they are very wealthy and they have so much money that they can invest. So the way they go into Africa, one is via the billions of dollars that they invest in countries. So they go to Sudan, they say, okay, we have a package of $10, $20 billion, and then all the Sudanese suddenly want to know more about Saudi Arabia or about what's happening there, or UAE or Qatar. And in some places, there's the support for the regime. There's a new regime in place. There's a coup d'etat that happened last week, let's say. This is an example. And then one of these nations would come to the new regime and say, okay, you guys will be here in power for maybe the next year or 2 or 3. Let's do business together. And it's very easy for them to get through because they have the money, which is the most important factor for a regime, for a newly established regime, to show that they care for the people, and a very important factor to move the economy forward. So this is mainly the first way to infiltrate this regime. The second one, because of the security threat that I mentioned, because illegal immigrants don't just go to Europe, they also go to Saudi Arabia and to UAE. One more point. The only difference is that in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, you can easily deport them back to their countries. In Europe, you don't have that yet. So this is also a factor that if they go and invest in these countries, they will limit and minimize the threat of illegal immigration and extremist movements moving from Africa to the Middle East. I'll just stop here, and then maybe later we can answer the question.
Thank you very much. There is a saying in Hungary that we are neighboring with ourselves. Thanks to the Treaty of Trianon, there's huge Hungarian minorities all around the Hungarian borders. And there is a very similar situation in the case of Somalia, because Somalis live beside the mother country, of course, in Djibouti, Ethiopia, and Kenya. My first question is how it's shaping Somali national identity, and what do you think how this diaspora can contribute to the, let's say, the stabilization of the country?
Thank you, Victor. I believe that is where I see the success. Let's go say the Western. We know the First World War, Second World War. After Civil War, every country rebuilt from zero. The diaspora for me today is a major key. I am diaspora, and I'm quite lucky. But diaspora also, we have a successful diaspora. By the World Bank, 1.6 billion US dollar that we send back home. So the debt the Somalia owes to the World Bank and international community, to be honest with you, I'd rather become president of Somalia instead of becoming president of France, because 300 billion, they owe them. So I'm already be owed by international bank 2 billion. So I'd rather have a country, very wealthy country, on that level side. We have also, and picking up the difficulty that after 40 years of civil war, so extremist. But however, what's important is we have to understand what we have as an asset in Somalia. Number one, I've got the second longest coast of the planet. Second, motorway of maritime. Per day, Somalian water towards the Red Sea, going all the way to your part of the neck of the planet, is $2 billion per day trade goes through Somalian water. 2 billion. If I put the procedure in place and get my taxation into the country between 6 to 10%, I don't need the help of anybody else. When you go to your petrol station and you put your car fuel, it goes through the Somalian water. Whatever goes in and out from Saudi Arabia goes through my water. Whatever goes in and out, Eritrea, Djibouti, Sudan, Egypt, goes through trade of our water. You heard about the Silk Road. It is the oldest trade on the planet, the Silk Road. From China, Pakistan, India, comes through Somalia, and it goes the land all the way to Mali and Mauritania. So economically, that country has been mismanaged. Agriculture side, food security. You mentioned the Qatar and Saudi Arabia. I don't need Somalia. It doesn't need Qatar and Saudi Arabia because they're short of water. They were short of food security. But we have the farming. So that's why they're buying and then putting their money while they have the money before the oil runs out to the future investment for the next 30 to 50 years in the future. Green energy. Offshore of Somalia, we have a 27 block of green energy done and proved by the Turkish. 2 of those reserve will sufficient be given to the rest of Europe, the whole Europe. 2 of my block for the green energy. So now the question is, sorry, be Frenchman also, and British, I'm fighting our interest. What I'm looking for, not division, is unification. How can we work together? How can we secure in a better manner? And migration. Somalia is the size of France plus Benelux. My population is only 15 million. My coastal level, if I get rid of the extremism and security, is like a Maldives. So can you imagine? I'm looking for migration. But what type of migration that I am looking? I've already got the Ethiopian migration. But I need them as well because they are the workers. But their children will be the future leaders of that country. The expats, we all know what that means, expat. I need them because they're the scientists, they're the doctors, they're the engineers. So Europe needs Africa and Africa needs Europe.
Thank you very much. Tamás, there is a narration that the West is under constant withdrawal from Africa. What's happened now in the Sahara region, that France lost its military bases. Now the US Army had to leave, or they are leaving Niger. Do you think it's an irreversible process, or the perspective is different?
Okay, so I think this is the complicated question in this panel. Yes, there is a very significant, let's say, Western withdrawal from Africa, which is I think more significant in the case of France, who lost 3 of their key countries in terms of influence in the recent years, without any substitution really, because you cannot say that yes, but they did gain something at another country. No, they didn't. So it's without compensation. Basically, the French-speaking territories were cut into half. So it's, in geopolitical terms, it's less than ideal. But also, if you consider the broader France-Afrique thing, and the one thing that those countries are considering to leave the financial arrangements they are having with Paris for decades, it's going to be a major loss for Paris. This part, I think, at this point, may be irreversible. I don't think if they will leave those financial arrangements, they will ever come back. And Paris is less sticking with it than it had before. So I think that's irreversible. However, I think there is this new scramble for Africa, and I try to analyze this thing in this broader context of this scramble. This scramble has been ignited by China's entering into the fold, but since then, many countries also arrived. It was first dominated by Asia, so it was also Japan. To a certain extent, it was also Indonesia. But countries like Turkey. Turkey has a very significant presence in Africa, and I think in Somalia definitely they have a very, very strong presence. So new players arrived, and Russia also reappeared with a very different approach, but still they are there. And I think it's interesting because you can contextualize it as the West versus the rest, but I think it's misleading. In one way, it's like everyone else versus China, because great powers, they are just like this. I mean, whoever the great power is, if one of the great powers gains an extensive win in one region, all the other ones will be like suddenly interested to balance it. And it doesn't care if we are authoritarian or democratic. No, they are great powers. They do all the same things every time. And I think if you contextualize it, that those countries are working together in many different fields in order to counter the Chinese domination of all the African markets, because there was a time when that was going to be the trajectory. I think you are closer to a more analytical truth. And if the West decides to cooperate with Turkey in one project or another, or try to complement those projects, again, in their best interest to counter Chinese dominance, I think Western presence can re-strengthen again. And I think this is the most likely perspective to come in the next years. I think the Western presence will be stronger again, also in realization of this more enhanced geopolitical rivalry. But in the case of France, I am not sure, and those specific cases that I mentioned, I don't think they are reversible. So I think you really posed me a very complicated question, and I think I really gave a very complicated answer. But please assure me if it was like, so if I made myself clear.
We enjoyed it because it was very clear. Thank you, Tamás. And sorry for the complicated question, but Africa,
it's a necessary question.
Yeah, and Africa, similar to other continents and regions, a very complicated region. Yeah. So, but we are here to have a little better understanding of this complex situation. Thank you, Mr. Marwan. We have mentioned already some countries from the Middle East region. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the Emirati, Turkey, which playing an active role in Africa, but we are still missing one actor, which has increasing power. And I see from your smile that you know which country will be. Iran, which is playing and extending these so-called forces of resistance, not only in the Middle East, but more and more we see these symptoms in Africa, in the Horn, mainly in Sudan. How do you see this Iranian influence and the aim of Iran in Africa?
Okay, now you got me at Iran. This is our favorite topic as Lebanese because we have Iranian influence every day and we can explain it to everyone how it goes, and we witnessed all the process of how Iran got more powerful and got in control of Lebanon somehow. So, but just to differentiate between Iranian influence and the others. So Iran comes from it's the Islamic Revolution in Iran. So the Islamic Revolution of 1978 has a project not just to control Iran and to govern the country called Iran, but to expand the Islamic Revolution to the rest of the world. So this is the main idea. And then from there we go into the details. How do they, when you are expanding or exporting a revolution elsewhere, a revolution has one interesting component, which is a military or a militia or a proxy. So what Iran does best is support militias, establish militias, like in Lebanon they established Hezbollah, they founded Hezbollah, and to go work within the destabilization factor in these countries. This is what they did in Lebanon, this is what they did in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, tried to do in Bahrain, tried to do in Kuwait, and in all the rest of the countries. So we will divide the Iranian role into two levels. Again, the North African region, which is the Arab, Sunni controlled, or mainly Arab and Sunni region, and the sub-Saharan Africa. In the Arab regimes, it's very hard for Iran to sell two ideas. The first one is Persian, because Iran is Persian and the rest of the countries are Arabs. So if you are a Persian coming into the Arab community, you know Arabs and Persian have thousands of years of challenges and wars. It will not be accepted. If they come with the Shia sect, which is one sect of Islam, so you have Shia and Sunni, if they come with the Shia ideology, of course, as well, it's not accepted by the rest of the Sunni Arabs. So you have Arab and Sunni, and you have Persian and Shia. It's not sellable. How do they infiltrate? They infiltrate by finding some groups or some militias that are ready to destabilize the regime. And because these entities cannot find the support in the Arab world and the Sunni world, they go to Iran as another Islamic country, but can support them to get this support from outside. So this is one component. The second component that Iran is playing, and this also succeeded not just in the North African region, but in the rest of Africa, is to target the main cause of Islam around the world, which is Palestine. Every Muslim in the world has in their back head the idea of regaining Palestine and Al-Quds and all these holy sites of Islam that are now in the debate between Palestine and Israel. So what Iran did is they supported Hamas and they recreated the Palestinian resistance and the military factor of the Palestinian cause. And this is how they got the acceptance first, and in some cases the support of the rest of the Muslim world. And this goes also to the Muslim countries in Africa that can now say, oh, okay, Iran is not a bad guy. They are not Persians, Shia coming to Trump. They are actually defending our global cause, which is Palestine. So this is how they managed to get it. And with that, you know, this dates back to a year or less than a year ago. But with that perception of supporting the resistance movements in the region, many of other military movements started looking for Iran for support, because Iran also is exporting military technology, and the military technology that Iran exports is not, you know, the sophisticated systems of NATO. They send these suicide drones. They send you some missiles that you can just throw to hurt your enemy, and they can also export small weapons. So it's easy for a militia and the small military group to partner with Iran, because there's no much to ask. At the same time, Iran can provide with this support. But from there, to get more into a political and economic support, I think the Iranians are still far away. And this game, they play it within the Chinese and the Russian influence in Africa, because, of course, if the Chinese and the Russians are present, if they want to find another country that they can bring in, they would rather bring Iran, because it is the closest ally. It is the Muslim ally that they have, because Russia is not Muslim, China is not Muslim, so they bring Iran as this Muslim support or umbrella or godfather to their work. And this is how they go in line with all the political, economic, and military work for these countries in the African continent.
Thank you, Mr. Marwan. And after Iran, I think it's high time to face the not only one, but two elephants in the room. Actually, China and Russia and their role in the continent. So I would like to raise this question for all of you, that how do you see the involvement, in one case China, and the other case of Russia in Africa, perhaps in the Horn of Africa, in the Sahel, and other regions? Thank you. Please, Abshir, who would like to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes. since you heard me last, you'll hear more of me now. I'll try to be very brief, but there's one thing different between the Russian and the Chinese involvement and the Western involvement. When you say Western, we are not naming one country. And this is the problem that you guys have in the West, is the protégés. Like whenever we talk to the Germans about helping Lebanon, they say, no, Lebanon is the French file. Whenever you talk to, I don't know, the French about Libya, they say, no, Libya is the Italian file. So the protégés in Europe and in the West are very problematic, because what you think as a country that is now in control of the situation or knows this country very well to deal with it, it's totally the opposite. This is why we see many failures in Africa. So I think the one advantage that Russia and China have is they don't have to say, oh, this is Chinese territory or this is Russian. Whenever there's a vacuum, they just go in. And I think the West should start thinking this way, because if the Germans fail or the Italians fail or the British fail, we shouldn't wait for them to fix their mess and then go, no, if the US can do the job, or if France, if any other country can do the job, so be it, because it's about the culture and the values that this is one. Second, please do not bring European bureaucracy to the countries that you want to work in. This is what the Chinese and the Russians understood. They came and they work with whatever is workable there and then try to build from bottom-up approach, not top-bottom. What the Europeans do and the Westerns do, they come, okay, these are our values, this is our bureaucracy, so you have to adjust everything that you have to meet these requests. And to be honest, it's very far. It's very hard for us and for the Africans as well, because you did that on a development of many centuries. You cannot expect other countries to do it in 10 years. Anyway, so to counter this, you need to understand the culture of the countries that you want to work in. Russians and the Chinese have two different things. The Russians have a historical understanding, and they have knowledge, and they have work that's been there for centuries, but they don't have the money anymore. The Chinese, they don't have the understanding because they are a very far away empire with its own culture, but they have the money and the resources. So in many places, they complement each other. In many countries in Africa, you see Chinese businesses and infrastructure, and you see Russian military operation or Russian military companies working there. So they understood how to complement each other, but I think there will come a time where they have to compete between each other as well. So if you want to challenge this, and this is my opinion, go have a bottom-up approach. And the second important thing that you have is the diaspora from these countries that is present in the West and have the Western values. And here we have one example of it that will be able to transform this in an organic way, not in an imposed way from outside.
Thank you very much. Who will continue? No? Abshir or Tamar?
Okay, so I go then first. Sorry, maybe it's more normal to have the order backwards. Again, a very easy question. How would you assess the role of China and Russia? I think this is two very different things. The role of China was, I think, at first absolutely positive, in the sense that African countries who were experiencing total ignorance at that time for at least 2 decades, because it was like, okay, so it's now post-Cold War liberal hegemony, we shouldn't concentrate really on Africa. The United Nations will do its job. If there is, security shortage, they will deploy blue helmets. If there is food shortage, they will single out some boxes, and everything will be solved. And so this is pretty much, in a nutshell, I know it's simplistic, but it was the American logic behind leaving alone the continent. And then came China, and China posed herself in a position where, okay, I don't care about your politics, I don't care about your social problems, what I do care about is business, and you are short on business, right? But you have good resources, why not make business? And there were, I think, very good examples. Angola, for instance, is a magnificent story of how to make great industry from basically zero in 10 years without, endemic corruption, which would have been very logical in a post-Civil War society. Very logical, but it wasn't endemic in Angola, for instance. And, you know, if one investor arrives, then came the other ones. I think we experienced the same thing here in Eastern Europe just as well. So now you have access to Chinese investments, and suddenly, there are also Western investments who want to, you know, complement the Chinese ones, want to challenge the Chinese ones. And, you know, it's good for us because we can pick. And I think this is what China did in Africa in the first place, and this is very positive. Again, there are certain places, certain industries, certain countries where China really became dominant. And, you know, becoming dominant is, of course, it's very good always for the great power, but not necessarily for the small, medium-sized countries. So it's like not that positive at this point, maybe. But again, it depends on the exact geographical location. Russia, on the other hand, saw this security gap where he could sell its mercenaries. But, you know, selling its mercenaries is a tricky thing because it doesn't enhance security in itself. It enhances regime security. And it is not by chance that Russian mercenaries have arrived in countries where the regime basically lost its legitimacy. So it's all about regime security and not really the country's security. So I think this is like a fake solution. What strikes me is that it doesn't seem to spread. So I think Russian influence in this sense reached its peak, or at least so it seems to me, because no miracle happened with the Islamists in Mozambique. Actually, it was an inglorious defeat for the Russian mercenaries. In Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, the situation didn't get any better, quite the contrary. So if I was yet another, I don't know, failing government in a neighboring country, I wouldn't choose the Russian thing to help me out, because it doesn't. So I think Russia is a specific case, and I think with the overall bettering of the security situation, Russian influence can be undone. So it's completely reversible because it doesn't go to society, unlike, you know, French influence, unlike Italian influence even, or Turkish influence. So it's easy to undo, even though it is strong now.
Thank you, Tamás. President Abshir?
I think I'm going to go different angle from the boys. And for us in Somalia, we're not naive. We've been dealing with the Chinese issue from centuries because we're on the Silk Road. Simple as that. Silk Road, we know how to do business with them, the Chinese. So that's why that right now in Somalia, there's a more Turkish presence than the Chinese. So we're in communication with them. But the important thing is we know exactly what we want from them. They're looking for food security. They're trying to do it, their effort, their best. But we are very difficult businessmen Somalians because we understand the trade. So that is our success.
It's true. It's definitely true.
Thank you. It's different from the rest of Africa and the Middle East. Because of the Silk Road, for centuries, for the spice, all the trade, as I said to you earlier, $2 billion per day trade goes through Somalian water. Multiplied by 365 days of the year, you can make the figure. So we know how to deal with it. The other side about Russia, I'm sure that you know that. We've been a victim of what's happened in 1977 between the Russian and the Americans in Somalia. It's exactly what's happening here in Ukraine next door today. And I'm sure that you've done your research on that one. We've been a victim between two major powers. The Americans who pushed it and asked them, Siad Barre, the regime at the time, to get rid of the Russian. They promised him a lot of money. He listened them through Saudi Arabia, but there was a false promise. This was the fall of the civil war. We paid the price for that. So we learned it, and the Russian went to Ogadenian War with the Ethiopian in 1977, with Cuba, and supported it, and we ended up basically fighting our neighbors, Ethiopia. A long, bloody war. So we're not naive, and that is why we are very successful in that country. Just a quick one, I'll give it to you. In 2014, because I have my own security company in the UK, the Gate Foundation approached me and they said, we want to go to Somalia. I've learned a lot. And I said, why is that Somalia? So if you Google Bill Gates Somaliland, you will see that. We flew out together. We got him Bill in Somalia. And I asked him one question. I said, why Somalia? And his answer was, what can we learn from them? They've been completely destroyed. No electricity, no cash point machine, no water, no medical system, no infrastructure. How the hell these people survive that we need to learn? If we have a blackout in Europe or North America. You can Google, you will see that. I was very surprised, and I said, what can we learn from them? It's very simple. How do they survive, these people? Because they kept it the heritage of Bedouin, nomadic people, treating themselves organic, medical, and herbal. So those people has got better chance to succeed and being an entrepreneur or a businessman, being geopolitically powerful position on them. So whoever we negotiating now in that country, or even myself, we're not naive. There's no free lunch. But we have to work together to survive on this small planet. A lot of people say to me, why Turkish? I was one of the people who bought Erdogan when he was a prime minister in Somalia. We did not have no international flight. He landed as a prime minister. I welcome him. For him to land in Somalia, Amazon soldier, who is the African Union, or who've been paid our taxpayers in Europe, refused for Erdogan to land in Somalia. And he's forced his way on that runway with his military team because the president of the time, Sheikh Sharif, invited him. They bought the first airline, international airline. Now then, we got the Ethiopian airline, Kenyan Airways. That's it. Somalia is open to the trade of the market now. There's more students getting scholarship in Turkey. There's more Turkish businessmen, because there's no free lunch. They are working in Somalia and taking a lot of the food security to their peoples over there. So the relationship is being built up. But as you were saying, in Europe we fault as well, because we think that that is non-negotiable. But that's why I'm here. We are on the ground. We understand what's happening. We are educating your people, and say that basically we need to move forward together. Because Europe, as I say to you, or the rest of the world needs Middle East and Africa. And Middle East and Africa needs also our partners. China, I don't blame them, the Chinese. It's an opportunity. It's a business people. They have to maintain and survive for their people. So if we are bad negotiating ourselves and we're very bad as a Western, we cannot blame the others.
Thank you very much. And still remaining in Somalia, we could see a shift in the recent years in the global violent extremist organizations, because 5-10 years ago it was evident that the epicenter of these movements are in the Middle East. Now it's shifted to Africa, and we already mentioned Al-Shabaab, which is operating in Somalia. How could you explain the existence and the activity of Al-Shabaab? Because there are very different explanations. It's simply a terrorist organization. Others arguing that it's a national force against foreign invaders, as they try to pretend themselves, or at least the results of the Ethiopian invasion in Somalia in 2006. So, President, how can you evaluate Al-Shabaab?
You put me on the spot as well. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to wear my hat as a military man and security man. You know, Al-Shabaab is an organization as an opportunist. Al-Shabaab, they don't have the ideology of religion. You mentioned Iran earlier. And there's a different layout of a group of extremist group, where there's Islam, where there's Christianity, and where there's Judaism. Those are three beliefs that we have in mankind on this earth. The Al-Shabaab issue is people who's been trained by the Taliban. You might know, and you know, I don't know yet, but you will find out from me today. Osama bin Laden was refugeed in Somalia, married to Somalian 4 wives, have children that he's left into the country. Islam is something that Somalian is following. But also, a lot of people say to me, Arabs, we know Arabs with the history of the planet. As I said to you earlier, the language and the land that we have it. We had Moses. Before he became a prophet, he was in Somalia. And he said in a Torah, if you look in it, in Judaism, he said, I've been the land of God. He was a general, and he said clearly that I went to a country in a region that I did not need anybody to translate me. They're writing and they're speaking. So if you look inside the Torah, you find the trace of Somalia. In Christianity, if you look at the Bible, you find the trace of Somalia. So in Islam, when the Prophet Muhammad basically asked them to leave Mecca and Medina, the scholars of Islam has been sent to Ethiopia and Somalia to be protected by the Christians. So the religion that they're talking about, Al-Shabaab, my question is who's funding Al-Shabaab? In UK, we had the same problem, the RAA. We managed it. In 80s, 90s, I'm sure that the British colleague of mine there is laughing at, knows about it. We maintained it. So my policy in security is to win the mind and the heart of the people. Al-Shabaab is stronger because they know that basically they are running in the area economically beneficial to them. And it's been supported outside interest. And the Somalian people are fed up of them because it's not Islam. It's a criminal.
Thank you very much. Tamás, there is still a third elephant in the room, the United States. So how do you see the role of the United States? Because everybody's speaking, China, Russia, EU. We slightly mentioned America, but what are you expecting? Because we see, for example, the competition for rare earth materials, the global competition between the United States and China. Do you think Africa can be a new theater for this?
I think it already is to a certain extent. And what I was just referring to before when I said the China entering the scene really opened the discourse for more investment, for more political room for maneuver for African countries. It also brought Africa as a continent under this great power rivalry thing. The Americans are not very active until this point, I can tell you. But I think the tendencies are slowly changing. Actually, if you take a look at American involvement in Africa, you have, let's be honest, American military bases in many places in Africa, even though it's not very open to the public. But if you consider investments and even trade, I mean, trade between the United States and Africa has been steadily decreasing in the past 20 years, which is absolutely amazing because the overall amount of trade, global trade, was constantly growing. So this is not a slow turning away from Africa. It was quite sudden and rapid from an American perspective. But this decrease, to my best knowledge, has stopped, and now there is also plans to invest. Countries that are like less, let's say, already infiltrated with Chinese business, especially when it comes to raw materials, to rare earth materials, because one of the key elements of the Chinese-American great power rivalry, and I think the most important theater is, of course, technology. And this thing is taking a direction where you will try to decouple the different standards, the different procedures of high-tech industries. And so you really have to be, you really have to maintain your access to raw materials if you want to get to such a costly and such a dangerous game with the other great power. So the Americans will definitely reappear. That's my take on this. And there is also some mention in the strategic documents of this present administration. The next administration will be, I think, different in whatever the winner will be. So it will be like slightly different. I think they will come back. But that's a very important caveat here, because the United States wanted to get back to Africa in 2015 already, because you had Barack Obama in the White House, who was labeled as African. I don't know. I mean, he was certainly black, but he didn't really have much to do with any African culture, Kenyan culture, whatever. And they really believed that because of the mere fact that he was black, and he will make a tour in Africa, and he will be like very well received in every corner, and everyone will be cheering. It didn't happen. Actually, the same happened that, like in Hungary or in Eastern Europe, when the Americans are coming here and they castigate us for, you know, not sharing their values. You know, the values we just invented 2 days ago, but you really have to follow them because those are the Western values and things like this. And the African nations were like, what? Why should I thought we were talking business. Why are you talking about how we should change our legislations, how we should change our politics and things like this. And it was a complete failure. And we don't know a lot about this trip only because it was in Africa, and you know, it didn't really came through the news. But it was a major failure for the Barack Obama presidency because it didn't bring any fruit. So my take on this is this: the United States might as well go back to Africa because of its need for rare earth materials and things like this, but they will really have a hard time because now they have this socialization that I will only make business if you also accept my values, and I think it's going to make it very difficult.
Thank you very much. Marwan, we have already spoken about the Somali diaspora, but perhaps it's high time to speak about the Lebanese diaspora and along the Gulf of Guinea. Can you share with us some thoughts that how these Lebanese people reach this very nice part of the world?
Yeah, so if you don't know a lot about the Lebanese, we are Phoenicians. And if we know one thing about Phoenicians is that they sailed all over the Mediterranean at least and the world. And they didn't conquer any city-state that they established. They just went there, they said, okay, we have this item, you have that item, let's trade, and then they built cities. So, and one of the very famous cities that the Phoenicians built is Carthage in Tunisia. It's in Africa as well. So throughout the centuries, the Lebanese people kept doing the same thing, but in a modern way. Today, if you go to many countries in Africa, I will mention two now that are very, very important. One is Cote d'Ivoire, and second one is Nigeria. The most important business gate to go through to do business in these countries are the Lebanese. They hold the gates to politics. The Lebanese do it in a very smart way. They don't choose one party and they support, So every Lebanese businessman gives money to all parties. Whoever wins, they will have a seat at the table later on. It's a Lebanese thing to do. So, but the thing about the Lebanese is that because we are a very small country, and we are a very divided country, and we were talking before about if you want to understand Lebanon, and if you think one day that you understood Lebanese politics, it means you understand nothing, because you can never understand the Lebanese politics. So that's the same on the diaspora, and because of the lack of geopolitical interest of Lebanon in these countries, they just play it business. And I think this is what's helping them flourish a lot in Africa, because at the end of the day, they don't have a Lebanese agenda while they are doing business. They just have a business agenda, and everybody likes to do business with somebody who's just interested in doing business without having a political interest. However, what's happening today is that because of this increased attention and influence from the major powers, the competition is becoming more hard to the Lebanese diaspora there, because at one point, even in business, they have to choose sides. Before, it was just about politics and the parties in Africa and the regimes. And if this one won the coup, then okay, they would go and support them. But today there's the international interest of these elephants that you just mentioned, the Americans and the Chinese and the Russians and the Europeans and all of that. So now they are in a place where they have to choose sides. And we'll give an example, since we're talking about Nigeria, a very famous Lebanese businessman from the Shaghuri family. So this guy got in business with some Chinese companies, some Russian companies, and of course with the Nigerian political elite. And this guy is now on the US sanctions list. So of course he's rightfully there because he did many malign work, but he wouldn't maybe be there if there wasn't a political attention about the political work that he's doing, not just the business work. So what's the future of that? I think at one point it comes to each nation and each business and each person to decide how they will move forward with their business political engagement in Africa. But to be fair and to be honest, they are still holding the keys to many fields and many sectors in many countries. There's one dark point about Lebanon and the diaspora that's in Africa. Many of the diaspora are affiliated with Hezbollah, and this has also played a negative role against them, because many of these countries saw in their business work as a way for them to introduce the Iranian influence, and this also played a negative role against their engagement. But to put this on the side, which is still very minimal in the work of the diaspora in Africa, the business relation or the business expansion of the Lebanese in Africa is now at a very divergent road, which part to take, and I think at one point each one will choose a side based on their own interest, not on the Lebanese interest.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for our speakers that they are very disciplined, so our time management is still perfect. So even at the end of this panel, we have possibility for a question for the audience. But before we do it, I just a very quick last question for all of us. My question is that for the potential African leader and two experts, what do you think? What's the secret of the further growth for Africa, or what would be your advice for African leaders that how to utilize this competition and how to avoid the mistakes in the future? So perhaps, President.
Thank you, Victor. And I think it's quite very positive what you just said. And I deal with a lot of the head of the states in Africa, and but also there's a new generation of Africa coming up, and those one are more positive side of it. We know what we want, we know where we're going, and division has gone. Divided to be conquered has become something of the past. Unification, that is where we all work. So I see the future very bright. You know, I love it. And in my political party right now, we're building up the youngest one out of the 1.5 million followers and also members. The youngest one is 15 years old. So we're already building up the future in that region. 15 years old, I know that. I've got another 10 years on me because I'm 57. By 67, I just want to get retired, guys. I'll be honest with you. I spend time with my wife and my kids. So, so there you go. So the bright future, I can see that.
Okay, so there is this new situation in Africa and how to avoid the pitfalls of this new interest. Yeah, basically. Yeah, I think what you just said is like completely true. If you take the latter 20th century history of Africa, you may be tempted to believe that Africa is a place for endless conflicts, and it was the same in the late 18th century when the Europeans started to penetrate the continent and they encountered like massive conflicts and no stable states. And they had this idea then that, okay, so African societies are by design, riven with conflicts and, just not developed enough and things like this. If they arrived 100 years earlier, they would have encountered a very different scenario in Africa. So, and I really advise us to avoid this based on our 20th century experiences. Africa is not designed necessarily for conflicts. There is a huge potential for growth. And even though in foreign policy we are always talking about hard things, I would stress now the soft things. I think what Africa lacks the most is like regular and strong education and training skills, things like this. This is to solve the societal fragmentation that were caused by those conflicts and the decade-long missing of strong state power is the most important thing to do for Africa. If this be done, I think the African countries will be able to follow a smart policy with regards to the great powers just as well. If society isn't strong, if it is very easy to play off different units of society against one another, then, again, this is the best game of great powers. But if you don't allow them to do that, you will be much better off. And I think the future is indeed like projected to be much brighter if those challenges can be addressed.
Wait for the train or? Yeah, so two things I think mainly are relevant. It's not just in the case of Africa, but mainly in the case of every struggling nation. The first one is not to be stuck in the past, because you would think that the majority... You would think that major problem... Okay, this is an African driver, I think. So you think that the majority of the problems are between Africa and the West or the countries that were colonizing them, but surprisingly, the majority of the problems are between the African nations themselves. Today you have two main African nations, Algeria and Morocco. Every day there's a potential war between these two countries because they hate each other to the extent that no one can ever imagine. So it's also internal, and if we are always stuck in the past events that happen and historical events, we will never be able to move forward. This is one. Second, is to always have a plan A only, not a plan B, because when you have a plan B, then you are not putting much effort on plan A to work, and then if it doesn't work in your country, then you get on a boat and then you move away. So if people only focus on plan A to make it happen where they are in their country, I think most of the world problems would be solved, not just the African problem.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. And now really the time for the audience for the questions. So please, Mr. Neyman.
I would like to welcome our guests, our political guests from CDI Africa, the Christian Democratic International, where we very closely collaborate with Abshir and Marwan in the Christian Democratic International Global. So the Global Christian Democratic International has a very strong decisive activity in Africa. And I have to tell you that the most vivid, most successful component of this organization is in Africa. The African CDI is in government in many countries. They have relevant, strong political parties. And we are today at a historical event because we have discussed always international relations and security politics in Tusványos, but the first Africa panel has taken place, and I think time has come to us to discuss African matters, African challenges. Because of the relevance and the importance of Africa, I do believe that the 21st century will be the century of Africa. And we will not be able to save understanding Africa, and I think we had 4 extremely renowned experts, and I am very glad that we had 2 Hungarian experts around the table. I would like to let you know that the Migration Institute, which was established in Hungary after 2015 migration crisis, where Viktor Marsai is very active, is a very good reaction of Hungary to contemporary challenges. My question will be to our Hungarian guests. Do we have the appropriate knowledge base, similarly to migration, to be able to deal with Africa? And if not, how to proceed? And what kind of partners do you see? And probably our guests can see these partners. Because we need to have a political activity, and I think we need to have also an intellectual base. An academic dimension is vitally important for us in Europe to understand much better these problems which have been discussed today. Thank you very much once more for accepting our invitation and this historic event. Congratulations to all of you who have participated at it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, who will start? Would you like
Okay,
to start?
so do you would you get an honest answer or a good-looking answer? So I don't think we really have the human capital for dealing with Africa. I think so. When I'm invited to the Africa Day in September, I encountered there like, I don't know, 60 people who are involved to any degree in Africa. And there is now some connection between them and the government, but honestly not very deep and not very structured. And yes, I think it is tangible that we are not very much ready. And what is like more a problem is that we still get our information mostly from Western partners. So we then check, you know, the French knowledge of Africa and not the African knowledge or Africa or the Turkish knowledge of Africa. And I think this is like a little bit of self-defeating outlook. So this should be paid more attention to, definitely. What is a good news here is there are countries who are much more involved in Africa and with a much wider history of being involved in Africa, who really struggle with the same problem. So I also spoke with Spanish experts in Africa, of Africa, and you know, I was so underwhelmed by their capacities, by their insights, and I don't want to say bad words about them because they were like nice people and things like this. But I think still Africa is the dark continent for Europe still, and I think this is something that we need to change Europe-wide, but also in Hungary, and I think steps should be made. And I think very slow steps are already being taken, but you know, more should follow. I don't know, Victor, if you agree with me.
Yeah, perhaps I'm a little bit more optimistic. I clearly remember when I decided to deal with Africa, it was 2008 or 9, and I had a discussion with Gabor Bur, he's actually now the Doyen in Hungary of the Hungarian African Studies, that, Victor, are you sure? And I told him, yeah, I would like to write a PhD about Somalia. Okay, then go to abroad. Okay, let's do it, because in Hungary there's no any possibilities. And I remember that during writing my PhD, I know that if I would like to write a real PhD about Somalia, I have to go to the Horn, even if even if it's not to Mogadishu, but at least to Kenya. And I remember 2012, I went there for a month, and it was completely self-financed by myself. And I got some support from God, and I managed to, for example, live with that time Hungarian military attaché, so I didn't have to pay for the accommodation. But comparing the prices, it was a big adventure. And now, after 10 years, I'm in the position that I can travel 2, 3, even 4 times to Africa annually. We have established partnership through the National University of Public Service with the Nairobi Kenyatta University, the Ethiopian Civil Service University, and we are expanding our network. And we are on the way, and research and knowing Africa or any other subject is always being on the way, on the route. You are never reach the aim or the target, but I think there's a huge development. I think the next step should be in the Hungarian African studies, the institutionalization, because there are different researchers, 1 or 2 people in different universities, or in the Migration Research Institute. But if we want to, reach level, 3 or 4, we should have a real, well-established, sustainably financed African center in Hungary. Because there is István Tarósi in Pécs, an Africa center which we are in contact, but actually it's a one-man show. I'm in the Migration Research Institute. There are other scholars, Szabolcs Pastor, for example, in the University of Public Service. But we need a real African center. We need at least an MA on African studies, and we should have African language courses in our universities, at least some. In the Eötvös Loránd University, Pécs University, because without this, the next step would be very complicated.
I think I'm going to step in. Thank you very much for honestly inviting us here. Because of your vision, that's why I'm here, and I'm sure that similar things. So thank you for the IDC, and the future and the vision is quite very large. Your question that you ask us, I agree with you, and what you just said. I think I might recruit this guy. Is now working for me now. So I've got my first recruit from, in my chapter here. Your question was very simple, and I'm going to be a little bit hard on that one. The question, the migration, did Europe understand themselves, first of all? That is the biggest problem we should ask for ourselves. What does that mean? I grew up in England. In 2002, coming from East Europe, coming to England, you had a visa. We were shocked. And I was saying, hold on, they're European better than I am. Why do they need a visa to come to UK? And then after that, we had abolished the visa, part of Europe. A lot of people was traveling to England. I think it's telling me to keep quiet now. Oh, the Iranians one. Okay. Sorry, I'm a pirate. I hijacked the Iranians as well. I've got a few Iranian boats in Somalia. So the question is now, my colleagues in my security company in UK, I have colleagues Hungarian, been working with me for the last 20 years, living in England, invest in Europe, and I'm sure that they've been asking my wife to send some pictures of my meeting here today. And Romanian guys, beside my military side of it. So Europe has lost the reality on position of the global. Migration. We all know what that means, migration. From the First World War, what do we learn from it here in Europe? Second World War. So that shows you anywhere in the country, on the planet, when there's a war, there's a migration. But there's a three type of migration. The economic one, because you need to survive, you need to eat. You need to be, alive. So you're risking your life to find better chance of work. 2, security. Your wife and children are not safe, so you will do anything as a human being to get them out the country. And 3rd, political. You're a highly educated person, but the system and the regime wants your life. Those are the one. So how we welcome this migration is a thing that we have to do research, and we know what we have to do it. There's another also migration that we never talk about it because I think we're too naive. It's the expats. Hungarian, Romanian, Russian, Belgium, French, going working to Middle East or going working to Africa. That is a part of the migration. But that migration is more painful than migration with the economic rescue, because those one are the knowledgeable one. This one is the one that the country invested their education and everything, and the taxpayers. But those people want to have a better life, so they work abroad. Like Brexit in the UK. A lot of European has left. The NHS has lost its workers. The bus drivers in England went back all their countries. So you see, so this is what I was saying. Europe has to understand exactly what we wanted for the rest of it, the migration on it.
Other question?
Thank you. I just have a comment that might be useful for the analysis in Africa, that there may be a fourth elephant in the room, but it's quite invisible. It is the Latin American influence in Africa. For example, in the case of Angola, the actual president of Angola studied in a military school in Moscow, Russia. He's the president of Angola. And he won through electoral fraud with the knowledge, with the know-how of Cuban and Venezuelan techniques for committing fraud. So Latin America influenced the elections of Angola, and instead of having a president who should be an ally of the West, he's an ally of communist countries. I have two short examples, more examples. The Sao Paulo Forum, all the presidents belonging to the Sao Paulo Forum support openly Hamas. In the case of the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, he broke relations with Israel to support Hamas. Lula from Brazil had a diplomatic incident with Israel because he's openly supporting Hamas. And finally, for some reason, the Sao Paulo Forum, in all its meetings, they support the creation or the establishment of the Sahrawi Republic. And members of this Sahrawi Republic go to Latin America and they assist to these meetings of Latin American communists. So there is an articulation since the Cuban involvement in wars in Africa. There's an articulation of the left in Africa and the left in Latin America. I just end up by saying that the main ally of Iran in Latin America is the government of my country, Venezuela. They have drones, they have troops, they have advisors from Iran into Venezuela. I don't have any question, but I thought it might be interesting to unite this different fronts. Thank you.
Thank you for the amendments. And perhaps we have possibility for one last question. Yeah, please.
Okay. My question is not about the migration. Put it away, migration. But how do you see the demographic situation in Africa in 2050 as an internal issue, not as a problem of migration?
Just a simple answer. Amazing. Amazing, what I mean to it is the global geopolitical now is a chaos. Everything is happening really difficult right now in terms of the war. So Africa is having a chance now to the growth of the youth. We have one thing. I'll give you an example. In the COVID-19, when I was leaving Europe, going to Africa, I had to have a special pass everywhere and a mask. When I arrived at, let's go say, in Senegal, Dakar, people were scared about me. They're saying, "Are you sick? Why are you wearing the mask?" People has got different approach. People survive there with a minimum income. The youth are getting more educated. Technology is helping us. The trade of the economic is helping us. So Africa will be the biggest population on the planet. But it's an opportunity now to make sure that we get close to them. And that is simple as that. And that's why I say amazing.
Okay. Okay. So I think there was this projection, but it was not 2000. It is now 2050, but until 2100, that the population of Africa will reach 1 billion. I think that's the standard. That's the standard projection of African demography made by the United Nations or sanctioned by the United Nations, which is an amazing growth, indeed. However, if you check the fertility rates of different countries, I think this economic boom thing in most of the countries have been passed already. So there is just a handful of countries in Africa where you still have a fertility rate of like 6.1 or something. I think that's only a handful of countries right now. There are countries who face quite similar demographic challenges as advanced countries, because you cannot really talk about Africa in this sense. There are many different countries, and their population dynamics is very different. The second is that the United Nations statistics has a fantastic tendency to be wrong after all. So actually, I would be very much, which is quite interesting, because demography is not, something that changes very suddenly. But still, I don't know any United Nations estimation that came to be true, that were given for a long term. So maybe we will not have this dramatic population growth in the end, but definitely Africa as a continent will be very much stronger in terms of manpower. And it's a good thing if you have strong societies, if you have working states, because manpower will be needed there. The problem will be if, chaos, the long ending of civil wars, other conflicts, great power interferences, and dirty games will continue, and people will not have jobs. People will be forced to migrate in a transcontinental migratory way. Now that's the problem. If we talk about migration, I think if the situation will be good in Africa, there will be migration, but in an inter-Africa way. So, like more advanced African countries will draw people from less advanced ones. I think it is still a very important feature of migration of Africa, and I think this is, from an analytical point of view, it is more like maybe more interesting than the transcontinental one.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Abshir Aden Ferro, Tamás Baranyi, and Abdallah Marwan. Thank you very much.